Hello, my name is Eric, and I have in front of me an Oil Gear PVWJ 098 pump. We're fortunate enough to have a cutaway here, so we can go through the operation of the pressure compensator and see how this pump actually works. This happens to be a left-handed pump, so on Oil Gear pumps, PVWJ pumps, if it's a left-handed pump, the suction will always be on the bottom, the pressure port is going to be on the top. And if you can imagine the pump in this position, we're not currently running our electric motor or engine, and you can see a few interesting things. First of all, this is the control piston. This is the piston that controls the flow of the pump. And this piston is held in a full stroke position by this large spring. You can only see a portion of it, but this large spring runs throughout the center line of the control piston. Very large spring, and that spring is holding the pump on stroke even before we start turning it. A few other things we can see. This is the pressure compensator adjuster. This is the adjuster we use to set our maximum pressure. So we have a jam nut on here. As we loosen that jam nut, we can turn in the pressure adjuster, and what that's going to do is push against this push pin assembly, and it's going to change the compression on this spring. This is our pressure compensator spring. On the other side of the pressure compensator spring is going to be our three-way spool. Call that a three-way spool because this is a three-way style control. The large spring holds the pump on stroke, and it hydraulically pilots oil into the control piston to push the pump off stroke. And I'll get to how that works in just a moment. But this is the way the pump is at rest. When we energize our electric motor, start turning the pump, we're immediately going to start raising pressure. We're going to do that because the pump is at full stroke. Remember, the control piston is at full stroke and it's held there by this large spring. We can't quite see it in the cutaway, but there's going to be a cross drill from the high pressure port through the valve plate, through the case of the pump, and up into the control. If you ever had an Oil Gear pump apart, you know that there's going to be a high pressure O-ring in the valve plate and a high pressure O-ring between the pump and the control. That's the passage for feeding high pressure oil into the control, and that's the oil that's going to cause the pump to go off stroke. So that high pressure oil is going to feed up into this chamber right here, and it's going to push the three-way spool in this direction against the compensator spring. So initially we're going to have lower pressure. We're going to build up resistance in our system. Our pressure is going to start to rise. As that pressure rises, the force pushing the three-way spool towards the spring is going to rise. When the force on the spool overcomes the force determined by the spring in the pressure compensator, this three-way spool is going to shift positions. And as that shifts, high pressure oil is going to be ported from the valve plate through the case to this land on the spool. The spool will move towards the spring, and that high pressure oil is going to go into this passage. This passage connects to this side of the control piston, and that's going to be our unloading chamber. So as we start pouring oil into this chamber, we start raising pressure. Eventually we're going to have enough pressure to overcome the large compensator spring, and we are going to shift the pump and reduce the flow. As the flow reduces, we're eventually going to get to a point where the pump is delivering the flow determined by the pressure compensator setting. So if the pressure compensator setting is at 3,000 psi, it will hold the spring in the correct position to port oil into the unloading chamber, push the pump off stroke so we can maintain a constant pressure at the compensator setting, but no flow or just enough flow to make up for system leakage or leakage in our motor or cylinder. Then let's suppose we're going to activate a function. Our pressure is going to drop. The pressure on this side of the spool is going to drop. So the spring force is going to shift the three-way spool back. It is going to block oil flow to this chamber. With no flow to this chamber, the spool is going to shift on stroke. The reason it's going to do that is there's a small orifice in the center line of the control piston that's always bleeding a little bit of oil off. So the oil that would be trapped in the unloading chamber bleeds through the center line of the control piston, and the spring is going to force the pump back on stroke. So it's a very basic operation of the pressure compensator. I realize this has a load sense spool, but we didn't go into the discussion of that, just simply how the pressure compensator works in standard pressure compensator, a load sense, or even a horsepower limiter. All the pumps are based off this simple pressure compensator theory.